The wind howled as dark clouds gathered above the quiet suburban neighborhood. The evening was drenched in an unsettling stillness, only broken by the occasional rustling of tree branches. On the outskirts of the neighborhood, a weathered house sat in the shadows, its porch light flickering dimly. The home, though unremarkable, held an undeniable warmth, a sanctuary from the storm. Max, a German shepherd, limped toward the house, his body battered and tired from days of wandering. His fur, once thick and sleek, was now matted with dirt and rain, his movements slow and labored. In his mouth, he carefully held something small, fragile, a trembling puppy. The puppy's tiny form shivered in the cold, eyes wide with fear, its body drenched from the storm. With each painful step, Max's heart grew heavier. He had no words to offer, no way to explain the urgency in his eyes, but he knew he had to find a safe place for the small life he carried. It had been days since he had seen the puppy's mother, a fellow stray he had met during his travels. She had been injured, unable to care for the pup, and Max, despite his own suffering, had taken it upon himself to protect the helpless creature. Max reached the porch of the house and gently lowered the puppy onto the doorstep. He stepped back, his body trembling with exhaustion. His eyes locked onto the door, pleading silently. There was no more time. His mission had reached its end. He had done all he could. Inside the house, Rebecca Parker was just finishing up her evening routine. The storm outside had kept her on edge, and she had been checking on her 4-year-old daughter Ellie for the past hour. Ellie, who had always been an inquisitive child, was playing with her dolls, unaware of the events unfolding outside. Suddenly, the sound of a soft whimper came from the front porch, followed by a light tap on the door. Rebecca froze, her hand still on the doorknob, unsure of what to do. She glanced at Ellie, who was staring wide-eyed at the door. Rebecca hesitated for a moment, then opened it. What she saw made her heart stop. A German shepherd stood at the doorstep, its body heaving with each breath, and its eyes locked onto her with a strange, desperate gaze. At its feet lay a small, trembling puppy, wet and shivering. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as she stepped back in shock. She instinctively crouched down, reaching out to the puppy. Ellie, clutching her stuffed animal, took a step forward, her eyes wide with both curiosity and concern. "Mom, what is it? Why is the dog so hurt?" Rebecca gently lifted the puppy into her arms, glancing at the German shepherd, who remained still, watching them with those sorrowful eyes. "I don't know, sweetie," Rebecca replied softly, her voice trembling. "But I think this dog is asking for our help." Ellie, her small face etched with confusion, asked again, "Why is it here? Why does it look like that?" Rebecca didn't have an answer. She cradled the puppy closer, feeling its tiny heart beat rapidly against her chest. She looked back at the German shepherd, whose gaze remained fixed on them. The dog's eyes seemed to speak without words, a silent plea, a promise of protection. Max wasn't just delivering the puppy to anyone. He was offering his trust, his last act of devotion. "I think it's trying to tell us something," Rebecca murmured. Max's body was beginning to tremble uncontrollably. He had done all he could. The storm was coming closer, and his strength was waning. He took a few steps backward, his eyes never leaving the small family in front of him. His mission was over. He had kept the puppy safe, and now it was in the hands of those who would care for it. "Mom, why is he leaving?" Ellie's voice broke the silence, a quiet sadness in her tone. Rebecca looked at the German shepherd, who was already starting to retreat into the shadows. "I don't know, Ellie. I think he's saying goodbye." Max took one final look at them, then disappeared into the night. The storm, once distant, now began to rage around them, but the house felt strangely warm in that moment. Ellie watched the dog disappear, her heart heavy with confusion and sadness. She looked at the puppy in her arms, who was now resting quietly, its tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "What do we do now?" Ellie whispered, her eyes never leaving the place where Max had stood. Rebecca stood up, cradling the puppy gently. She didn't have an answer, but she knew one thing for certain: their lives had just changed forever. Whatever journey Max had undertaken, whatever trials he had endured, they were now part of their story. "First, we keep the puppy safe," Rebecca said softly, her voice resolute. "Then, we'll figure out the rest." As they closed the door and moved inside, the storm outside seemed to grow stronger, but the warmth inside the house felt like a comforting embrace. Ellie stayed close to her mother, holding the puppy tightly in her small arms, her heart filled with a quiet promise to protect it, just as Max had protected it before her. The house was silent, save for the sound of the rain pounding against the windows. But somewhere in the distance, the faintest howl of a German shepherd could be heard. Max was out there, somewhere in the storm, still guarding the world in his own silent, steadfast way. As the rain continued to pour outside, Rebecca sat by the fireplace, carefully examining the puppy in her lap. Its small body had started to warm up, but the pain in its eyes was still evident. The tiny creature, now safe in their home, looked at her with silent gratitude, as if understanding the gravity of its rescue. Ellie, sitting beside her, stroked the puppy gently, her fingers tender as she spoke softly to it. "Don't worry, little one," Ellie whispered, her voice full of innocence and comfort. "You're safe now. You don't have to be scared anymore." Rebecca smiled at her daughter, but her mind was far from at ease. She couldn't shake the image of the German shepherd, the silent plea in its eyes, the way it had vanished into the night as though it had completed its mission. It was as if it had known that once the puppy was safe, it could rest. Suddenly, the quietness of the house was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ellie jumped at the sound, but Rebecca was already standing, her hand gripping the doorknob. She opened the door cautiously, expecting perhaps a neighbor or someone seeking shelter from the storm. Instead, standing on the porch, drenched but determined, was Officer James Hawkins, the very man Rebecca had contacted earlier. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I think I know what's going on with that dog you found." Rebecca's heart raced as she motioned for him to come inside. She had no idea what to expect, but the officer's grim expression told her that what he had to say would change everything. Max, meanwhile, had vanished into the storm. His body ached with each step he took, the wounds from his past still fresh in his mind. His once strong legs, now barely able to carry him, staggered along the rain-soaked streets. But his purpose remained clear. He had one final mission. Flashbacks to his time as a police dog flooded his senses as he limped through the rain. Max had been one of the finest working dogs in the force. Trained to track criminals, sniff out explosives, and protect his handler at all costs, Max had built a reputation for bravery. His bond with his partner, Officer Hawkins, had been unbreakable. Together, they had faced danger time and time again, saving countless lives. But that was before the accident. During a high-speed chase, Max had been injured, severely. His leg was broken, and his ability to perform at the level he once did was compromised. Officer Hawkins had been devastated, but the decision was made: Max had to retire. "I can't let you go, buddy," Hawkins had said to him during their final moments on the force, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done your part. You've earned your rest." But Max hadn't been ready to rest. The streets were no place for a dog like him, and yet, he found himself wandering them, lost and alone. Without his handler, without a purpose, Max struggled to find his place in the world. His training, his instincts, everything that had once defined him, now felt irrelevant. He became a shadow of his former self, until he met Shadow. Officer Hawkins followed Rebecca into the living room, his eyes immediately locking onto the puppy in her arms. He had seen it all before, dogs who had been abandoned, who had been lost. But this was different. The moment he saw the puppy, he knew that there was something more to the story than a simple stray. "Where did you find it?" Hawkins asked, sitting down across from Rebecca. Rebecca hesitated, her fingers lightly brushing the puppy's fur. "It was brought here by a German shepherd. He looked like he was on a mission. He placed the puppy on our doorstep and just left." Hawkins's expression hardened, his jaw clenched. He had seen that look before, the same determination in a dog's eyes that had once been present in Max's. He leaned forward, his voice low. "That dog," he said, pausing as if to gather his thoughts. "That was Max." Rebecca's eyes widened in shock. "Max? The dog who brought this puppy here? But why?" Hawkins ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the story pressing down on him. "Max was a police dog. He worked alongside me for years, keeping the streets safe. But after he was injured, he was forced into retirement. He wasn't the same dog after that. I don't think he ever truly accepted it. When I retired him, I thought he'd find peace. But I had no idea he would end up on a mission like this." "Mission," Rebecca repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Hawkins nodded slowly. "Yes. The puppy Shadow, that's his son. Back in the storm, Max pushed forward, driven by a sense of duty stronger than the pain in his legs. He had found Shadow, abandoned in the same way he had once been, and he couldn't let the pup suffer the same fate. Max had kept the little one safe, hiding in alleyways and feeding him scraps, but now in his final act of love and sacrifice, he knew what he had to do. He had to make sure Shadow survived. He had to pass on the torch, just as Officer Hawkins had once passed on the responsibility to him. Inside the house, Hawkins continued to speak, his voice heavy with sorrow. Max was the one who protected Shadow. When his mother died, he took the pup under his wing. But Max wasn't just bringing Shadow to safety. He was telling you something. Max knew he didn't have much time left. He knew this would be his last act of service. Rebecca was silent, her mind racing as she processed everything. Max, the heroic dog who had saved countless lives, had been on a mission of his own, an act of love for his son, Shadow, and an act of hope for the family he had entrusted with the puppy's care. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Parker," Hawkins said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "I had no idea he would end up here, but I'm glad he did. Max trusted you, and so do I." Rebecca looked down at Shadow, who was now resting peacefully in her arms. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: Max's journey, his sacrifice, would not be forgotten. The storm outside began to calm, but inside the Parker home, a sense of purpose settled over them. Max's legacy had been passed on, and with it, a responsibility, one that Rebecca and Ellie were ready to take on. The road ahead would not be easy, but they would face it together, carrying the memory of a dog who had given everything for his son. As the days passed, the storm subsided, but the weight of what had transpired lingered heavily within the Parker household. The truth about Max's sacrifice hung in the air, and it was impossible to ignore the bond that had formed between Ellie and Shadow. The little puppy, once so fragile and scared, had begun to thrive under Ellie's care, growing stronger each day. Ellie would spend hours by the fireplace with Shadow nestled in her lap, whispering to him as though he were the most precious thing in the world. And in a way, he was. He had become the embodiment of hope, a symbol of the love Max had given, and the love Ellie had yet to fully understand. Rebecca watched these moments with a soft smile. She had always known that Ellie had a gift for understanding animals, but she had never seen her daughter so drawn to one before. It was as if Ellie and Shadow shared an unspoken language, one built on mutual trust and a deep, silent understanding. But there was more to the story than just a bond between a girl and a puppy. As the days wore on, Rebecca found herself obsessing over the question that lingered in her mind: why had Max brought Shadow here? What was the urgency behind his mission? She knew there had to be more to it than just a simple act of kindness. Late one evening, when the house was quiet and the only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees, Rebecca sat alone at the kitchen table. She had the phone in her hand, staring at the number she had dialed several times before. Officer Hawkins had told her to call him if she had any more questions about Max, but each time she had hesitated, unsure of what to ask. Now, with the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on her, she pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before Hawkins picked up. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his voice heavy, "what's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about Max," Rebecca began, her voice tight with emotion. "I understand that he brought Shadow here for a reason. But what I don't understand is, why? Why did he choose us? Why bring him here, of all places?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Rebecca could almost hear Hawkins' internal struggle before he spoke. "Max. He had a sense of duty. A deep, unwavering sense of responsibility," Hawkins said slowly. "After he was retired, he had nothing left. No work, no purpose. But when he found Shadow, it was like a spark reignited in him. He couldn't just leave him out there, not after everything he'd been through." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. "But why us?" "I'll tell you something, Mrs. Parker," Hawkins continued, his voice more solemn now. "Max wasn't just bringing Shadow to any family. He was looking for someone strong enough to protect him. He knew that Shadow had a future, but that future was at risk. Shadow wasn't just any puppy. He's part of something bigger." Rebecca's pulse quickened as she processed his words. "Bigger? What do you mean?" Hawkins hesitated again. "There's something you need to know. Shadow's mother. She wasn't just a stray. She was part of a special program, a classified project. The same one that Max was part of. They were bred to work together, to track, to protect. But when the project was shut down, everything was erased. The records, the identities, the purpose. Shadow, he's the last of them. Rebecca's heart raced as the truth began to sink in. Max hadn't just been protecting a helpless puppy. He had been protecting a legacy that others might have wanted to exploit. So Max. He brought Shadow here because he knew the danger was closing in on him, Rebecca whispered, realization dawning on her. He wanted to make sure Shadow was safe. He didn't want him to fall into the wrong hands. Hawkins sighed deeply. Exactly. Max knew that if Shadow was found, there would be people who would stop at nothing to control him. People who would use him for their own purposes. Max couldn't let that happen.
The revelation hit Rebecca like a freight train.
Her mind spun as she pieced together the mystery. Max had sacrificed everything, not just for a puppy, but for something much bigger than himself. He had known that by bringing Shadow to her family, he was ensuring his safety. And now, it was up to her to protect him. Rebecca looked over at Ellie, who was asleep on the couch, her arm draped protectively around Shadow. The puppy had finally drifted off to sleep, his tiny body curled up beside her, looking peaceful and safe. I will protect him, Rebecca whispered, more to herself than to Hawkins. I won't let anyone take him away. I promise. I know you will, Hawkins said softly. And there's one more thing you should know. Max was a hero, not just because of his training, but because of his heart. He knew what was at stake, and he did everything he could to make sure Shadow would have a chance at a normal life. He couldn't trust just anyone.
He trusted you.
The conversation ended, and Rebecca set the phone down with a quiet resolve. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: Shadow was no ordinary puppy, and Max's mission wasn't just about a stray dog finding shelter. It was about protecting something far more valuable.
Rebecca rose from the kitchen table and walked over to the living room, where Ellie and Shadow lay sleeping.
She gently brushed a lock of hair away from Ellie's forehead, her heart swelling with love and determination. Max's mission had come to her family for a reason, and she would do whatever it took to ensure that Shadow's future would be as safe and loving as the one Max had dreamed of. The following days were filled with quiet reflection and subtle preparation. Rebecca kept a close eye on Shadow, watching him grow stronger with each passing day. But there was something in the back of her mind, a lingering fear that the peaceful life they had built would soon be shattered. One afternoon, while Ellie was playing with Shadow in the backyard, Rebecca received a call she wasn't expecting. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words it carried were chilling. We know you have the dog. Bring him to us, or we'll come for him ourselves. The phone call echoed in Rebecca's mind long after she hung up. The voice on the other end had been cold, threatening, and far too sure of itself. They knew about Shadow. Whoever they were coming for him, and they would stop at nothing to get him. Rebecca had never imagined her quiet life could be turned upside down like this. She had always thought she was safe, hidden away from the chaos of the world. But now, with Shadow in her care, everything had changed. The phone call wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. She rushed to the living room, where Ellie was sitting cross-legged on the floor, playing with Shadow. The little puppy had grown so much in the past few days. His fur was fluffier, his movements more confident, his bark growing louder. But even in his newfound strength, there was an underlying fear that Rebecca could see in his eyes, as if he knew something was coming. Ellie, Rebecca said, her voice tight with urgency. We need to talk. Ellie looked up at her mother, confusion written across her small face. What's wrong, Mom? Rebecca knelt beside her, taking Ellie's hands into her own. I just got a phone call, she said quietly. There are people coming after Shadow. We need to leave. Now. Ellie's eyes widened, her little fingers trembling. But why? What do they want with Shadow? Rebecca swallowed hard. She had never intended to tell Ellie the full truth, not until she was older. But the truth had come crashing down on them faster than she could have ever imagined. Shadow is special, Rebecca said softly, brushing Ellie's hair back from her face. His mother, she wasn't just any dog. And Max brought him here to keep him safe. But now, there are people who want to hurt him. They want to use him for something dangerous. Ellie's face crumpled in fear. I won't let them take him, Mom. I'll protect him. Rebecca nodded, her heart breaking. She had no idea what was coming, but she couldn't let her daughter face it alone. "We're going to protect him together," Rebecca said firmly. "But we need to move fast." As the night settled in, Rebecca began to pack a bag with the essentials: clothes, food, and as many documents as she could grab. She knew the threats wouldn't just stop with a phone call. Whoever they were, they would come looking for Shadow, and they would do whatever it took to find him. While she packed, Ellie sat quietly with Shadow, holding him close as if trying to reassure him, even though she was just as scared. "Don't worry, Shadow," Ellie whispered, her voice shaky but determined. "We're not going to let anyone hurt you." The puppy licked her hand in response, his tail wagging weakly as he nuzzled into her side. It wasn't long before the sound of heavy footsteps echoed outside the house. Rebecca froze. They were here. The ominous warning had been true. The people who were after Shadow were close. A sharp knock on the door shattered the stillness. Rebecca's heart leaped into her throat, but she didn't hesitate. She grabbed Ellie by the hand and moved toward the back door, leading her out into the backyard. "Stay close to me, Ellie," Rebecca whispered urgently. "We're going to the neighbor's house first. We need to get out of here before they come in." Ellie nodded, clutching Shadow tightly to her chest. The rain had returned, falling harder than before, but they didn't have time to wait for it to stop. They had to move now. As they made their way through the backyard, a voice rang out from the front of the house, sharp and commanding. "Rebecca Parker. We know you're in there. Open the door." Rebecca's heart raced. The urgency in the voice made it clear they were serious. But she wasn't going to give in. She would never let them take Shadow. Not after everything Max had sacrificed. She reached the fence at the back of the yard and stopped for a moment, her breath heavy in the cold air. She could hear their footsteps now, closer, searching. Time was running out. "Ellie, we have to climb the fence," Rebecca said quickly. "I need you to stay calm and follow me. I'll go first, then you come after." Ellie nodded, her face pale but determined. She handed Shadow to her mother. "I'll be right behind you, Mom. I'm not letting him out of my sight." Rebecca climbed over the fence, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked back at Ellie, who was already scaling the fence with surprising speed. When Ellie reached the top, Rebecca helped her over, and together, they sprinted across the neighbor's yard toward the street. But just as they were about to reach the safety of the other side, the sound of a car engine roared to life in the distance. The men were closing in. "We can't let them catch us," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse from the panic building inside her. She turned to Ellie. "We need to keep running. I'll find us a place to hide." Ellie nodded, her small hand gripping her mother's tightly. And then, as they sprinted down the street, they heard the unmistakable screech of tires on the wet road behind them. The men were following them. The hunt was on. As the chase continued, Rebecca kept her eyes ahead, scanning the streets for any sign of a safe place to take refuge. Her thoughts were racing. She had to protect Ellie, and she had to protect Shadow. There was no turning back now. In the distance, she spotted a park, dark and quiet, the perfect place to hide. They could disappear there, wait for the men to pass, and then find a way to get help. But as they neared the park, something unexpected happened. A figure stepped out from behind a tree, blocking their path. The figure was tall, with a dark coat and a confident stride. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as she recognized him. It was Max. The park was eerily quiet under the heavy rain, the dark trees casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the damp grass. Rebecca, Ellie, and Shadow stopped in their tracks, eyes wide in disbelief as the figure standing in front of them became clearer in the dim light. Max. For a moment, Rebecca was paralyzed by the surreal sight. Max, the German shepherd, was standing there, his body weary, his fur still matted from the storm. His eyes, those familiar soulful eyes, met hers, filled with a silent strength that took her breath away. "Max," Rebecca whispered, her voice trembling. She felt as if she were dreaming, as if everything happening was too impossible to be real. Max's tail twitched slightly, but he didn't move closer. He simply stood there, watching them, his gaze steady and filled with purpose. Ellie, still holding Shadow close, stepped forward cautiously. "Max, you're still alive?" Max didn't respond, but something in his posture made it clear that he had one last mission to fulfill. His eyes shifted toward the street where the sound of engines could be heard approaching. They weren't safe yet. "We need to go," Max seemed to say with a quiet intensity in his gaze. He motioned with his head, urging them to follow him. Rebecca felt a surge of urgency. Ellie, stay close. Don't let Shadow out of your arms. Ellie nodded, her small form pressing against her mother's side as they moved toward the deeper part of the park. Max led the way, his movements slow but determined, as if he were drawing on the last reserves of his strength to protect them. Every step he took echoed a legacy of sacrifice, a hero who had given everything for his family, for Shadow. They passed through the park and into the woods that bordered it. The sounds of the men chasing them grew fainter, but Rebecca knew it wouldn't be long before they found their trail. The heavy rain was the only cover they had, but it wasn't enough to stop those determined to find Shadow. As they reached the edge of the forest, Max suddenly stopped. He turned to look at Rebecca, Ellie, and Shadow, his eyes filled with a quiet, knowing sorrow. Rebecca's heart sank. She understood. Max had led them here, and now it was time for him to make his final stand. Max, Rebecca said softly, her voice breaking. You've done enough. You don't have to keep going. But Max shook his head, his body trembling with exhaustion. He wasn't done yet. His eyes locked onto Shadow, who was now quietly resting in Ellie's arms, still unaware of the danger surrounding them. Max's gaze softened, filled with a love that transcended words. This was his final act of loyalty, his last promise to a son he had protected against all odds. I won't let them take him, Max, Rebecca whispered, tears filling her eyes. I'll keep him safe. I promise you. Max took one last step forward, nuzzling Ellie's hand as if giving his silent approval. Then, with a final glance at Rebecca, he turned and ran back toward the park, his body weakening but his spirit undeterred. It was time for him to face the enemy head-on, to protect them one last time. The chase was inevitable. Minutes later, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Rebecca held Ellie tightly, shielding her from the chaos that was unfolding. They had to get to safety, but they couldn't leave Max behind. Suddenly, the headlights of several cars illuminated the entrance to the park. A group of men emerged, their faces grim and determined, their eyes scanning the area for their target. Where is he? One of them demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Max appeared, his powerful form silhouetted against the headlights, his body now standing firm and unwavering. This is it, Rebecca whispered, knowing that Max was preparing to face the consequences of his choices. She could see the men hesitate for a moment, unsure of whether to approach. But then, the sound of barking filled the air, loud and fierce. Max's bark echoed through the trees, a challenge, a defiance. Get back, one of the men shouted, but Max wasn't about to back down. He lunged forward, teeth bared, as if to say, "You'll have to go through me first." The men froze, but their leader, a tall figure in a black coat, stepped forward. "We're not here to harm you, Max. But you've gone rogue. You've broken the rules." Max growled in response, his body poised and ready to fight. He wasn't going to let them take Shadow. "Take him," the leader said, nodding to his men. But before they could make a move, a loud, authoritative voice rang out from behind them. "Stop." The voice was unmistakable. Officer Hawkins stepped forward, his badge gleaming in the night. He had arrived just in time. "Back off," Hawkins commanded, his voice steady and unwavering. "This dog, this hero, has earned the right to choose who he protects. And I'm not about to let you take him." The men hesitated, looking at Hawkins. They had been expecting him, but the shift in power was undeniable. Max had always been loyal to his handler, and now Hawkins was here to return that loyalty. "We'll take it from here," Hawkins added, stepping in front of Max. The leader of the group glared at him but finally backed down, signaling his men to retreat. They climbed back into their vehicles, leaving the park in silence. Rebecca stood there, stunned, her heart still racing. The storm had cleared, and the night was quiet once more. Max, exhausted and bloodied, walked over to Ellie, who knelt down to greet him. The puppy, now safe, nestled into her arms once more. "Thank you, Max," Ellie whispered, her voice filled with love and gratitude. "Thank you for everything." Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with peace, as if he knew his mission was complete. He had done what he came to do. And now, it was time for him to rest. The days that followed were filled with healing, both for Max and for the family. Hawkins ensured that Shadow was kept safe, his existence now protected by the law. Max, though no longer physically with them, remained a symbol of courage and sacrifice that would never be forgotten. Years later, Ellie, now grown, would tell the story of Max to her children. She would speak of the German Shepherd who had given everything for love, for loyalty, and for the hope of a better future. She would tell them of the bond between a girl and a dog, a bond that could never be broken. And in the heart of the park where Max had made his final stand, a small plaque stood, honoring the memory of a hero who had protected those he loved until the very end. This story conveys the power of loyalty, sacrifice, and love that transcends species. It highlights the selflessness of Max, the German Shepherd, who not only serves as a protector but also embodies the unconditional love and commitment that we should strive for in our own lives. The story reveals the profound bond between humans and animals, showing that acts of kindness, protection, and care can change lives forever. The story underscores the importance of love, sacrifice, and responsibility, especially when it comes to caring for those who cannot care for themselves. Max's unwavering dedication to his purpose and the legacy of his sacrifice remind us of the significant impact we can have on others, whether human or animal. It urges us to act with compassion and to protect what matters most, even when it requires great personal cost. We invite you to share your thoughts by liking this video, leaving a comment, and sharing your feelings about the story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to ensure you never miss another meaningful tale like this one. Your engagement is an incredible source of motivation for us to continue creating impactful content that resonates deeply. Every interaction is a step toward inspiring more people with heartfelt stories. Thank you so much for watching. We truly appreciate your support. Stay tuned for more meaningful stories that will touch your heart. We look forward to bringing you more inspirational tales.